When you think about transcendent athletes, who comes to mind? Babe Ruth? Michael Jordan? Usain Bolt? There's a certain echelon of athletes that have come to define greatness in their respective sports, their accomplishments so historic that people will talk about them as long as the sport continues. Babe Ruth was the most terrifying home run hitter baseball had ever seen, and he almost single-handedly shaped the landscape of today's game. Michael Jordan led the Chicago Bulls to 2 separate three-peats as NBA champions and became a cultural icon in the process. And Usain Bolt, aside being one of the most decorated track and field athletes in history, is simply the fastest man who has ever lived. Almost every sport has an athlete like this. The marathon has Eliud Kipchoge, gymnastics has Simone Biles, swimming has Michael Phelps, and so on. But there's one man who has been more dominant than any other athlete in history, and his name is Ronnie O'Sullivan. Part 1. I'm sorry, who? If this name doesn't ring any bells, don't worry, you're in good company. This is a list of the 25 most popular sports in the world according to some website. It's less than thorough, but it'll do for now. Take a guess. What sport does Ronnie play? If you guessed badminton, you're incorrect, but on the right track. The name of Ronnie's sport is very silly. Hurling is another good guess. That's a sport I've never even heard of, but wrong again. Look, I'm just gonna save you the trouble. Ronnie's sport is so obscure it doesn't even appear on this list. Ronnie O'Sullivan is a professional snooker player. If you live outside the British Isles, it's likely that you've never even heard of snooker. Its goofy name tracks pretty well with Britain's long and storied history of sports with goofy names, but if you can get past that, it's actually a fascinating game. For all my American friends watching, snooker is a cue sport akin to pool or billiards. It's played on a large felt table and players strike a white cue ball in an attempt to pocket various colored balls of differing point values to win. I'm going to take some time here to explain the rules, but if you already know how snooker works, you can use the chapter markers to jump ahead to part 3. Part 2. The rules. Before I get into this, I just want to give a brief disclaimer. Firstly, since snooker is a British sport, it's technically pronounced snooker, but I'm not British, so I'm just gonna pronounce it like an American. And second, I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. My goal here is to give someone who's never heard of snooker a good enough understanding of the rules so they can just follow along. The game works like this. There are 15 red balls worth a point apiece, and 6 other balls worth 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 points apiece. The objective is to pocket or pot all 15 red balls followed by the 6 other balls in order of ascending point value. The player with the highest score when the table clears is the winner. Snooker and pool are similar in that a player continues shooting as long as they pot a ball with every shot and don't commit any fouls. The place where the games diverge, though, is with snooker's inclusion of the free shot. A player's first objective is to clear the table of the reds, but every time you pot one, you're awarded a free shot. A player can use this free shot to pot any ball on the table, regardless of its point value. So the idea is to pot one of the higher point value balls to get a higher score. Once you've done this, the higher point value ball that you've just potted is placed back on the table in its original position and is in play once more. And this is important to remember. No matter what, if there are still red balls on the table, the non-red ball you sink with your free shot will be placed back on the table in its original position. So play generally consists of a player potting a red, potting a non-red for their free shot, and then back to a red again. This cycle continues until the player either misses or fouls, at which point it's their opponent's turn to shoot. Each individual game, from the break to the clearing of the table, is called a frame, and a player wins a frame when they've built up a large enough scoring lead that their opponent can't make up the point difference.
The thing to win. That was close.
I'm going to skip over some of the finer details like fouls and cue ball strategy in favor of keeping this rules explanation brief, but you can generally pick up on these nuances once you've watched a couple frames. There are some gameplay links in the description if you want to check them out. Part 3. Ronnie and the Snooker Mountaintop. So now that I've gotten the rules out of the way, I want to talk about Ronnie in the context of snooker. If I'm asserting that he's the most dominant athlete in sports history, he better damn well be the most dominant athlete in snooker history. If you've just watched the explanation of the rules and think that the term athlete doesn't describe a snooker player because they wear tuxedos and participate in a contest of precision rather than one of brute strength, I'd encourage you to broaden your horizons a little bit. A professional snooker player dedicates their entire life to a sport that requires immense concentration and technical skill. Snooker matches last for hours, and players burn thousands of calories in a long day of tournament play. An athlete is an athlete, and this 47-year-old man in a tux is no ordinary athlete.
There's only one Ronnie O'Sullivan. He wins 3-0, but sensational.
On average, a snooker player wins a frame with 50 to 80 points. If a player scores 100 points in a frame, it's called a century break. These are fairly common in professional play, but still an achievement. I'd liken a century break to a triple-double in basketball. And in the same way that a player like Russell Westbrook has spent his career making triple-doubles look like a relaxing walk on the beach, Ronnie has been racking up century breaks like you can't win a frame without one.
It's the storybook ending with his 1000th century.
His career total of nearly 1,200 is the most in history, and it frankly makes the rest of the leaderboard look like amateurs. But snooker scoring achievements don't end at the century break. The most points possible in a single frame is 147. This is referred to as a max break, and unlike the century break, they are incredibly rare in professional play. To score 147 points in a single frame, a player has to clear the entire table without missing a single shot, but they have to do it in a very particular way. Firstly, they have to pot every single red ball, and in between each red ball, they have to pot the 7-point black ball and only the 7-point black ball for each and every one of their 15 free shots. And the black ball is worth 7 points for a reason. Look how awkwardly it's placed at the end of the table. It's always sitting in traffic due to its proximity to the reds, which can make it really tough to pot. And since the black ball sits at the bottom of the table, a player generally has to impart a lot of spin on the cue ball to make sure it's in the right place for their next shot. Once a player gets the reds off the table, the work still isn't over. They still have to pot the remaining 6 non-red balls in order of ascending point value. For those keeping track at home, that is 36 straight shots without a miss, and all 36 shots must be taken in precisely the manner I've just outlined, or the total won't add up to 147. If you're in the middle of clearing the reds and the cue ball lands in a place where you don't have a viable shot, your max break is history. If the century break is comparable to basketball's triple-double, the max break is equivalent to a pitcher throwing a perfect game in baseball. Perfect games are one of the rarest phenomena in sports. A pitcher has to pitch a full 9-inning game without allowing a single base runner. No hits, no walks, nothing. There's zero margin for error.
Felix Hernandez, the 2-2. He got him! 34 years, 119 games. It's finally happened. A perfect game by a Seattle Mariner. It was done by the King.
If the pitcher walks a batter with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th, the perfect game is gone. And snooker's the same way. A 140-point break is still a dominant win, but it's not a max break. Achieving a max break isn't quite as rare as a perfect game, but to do so more than once in competitive play puts a player in elite territory. For the all-time leaders in competitive max breaks, Judd Trump, no relation, is in 5th place with 7. Stuart Bingham is in 4th with 9, Stephen Hendry with 11, John Higgins with 12, and our titular hero with 15. That is 15 times that Ronnie O'Sullivan has made his opponent sit there and watch in agony as he gets thumped by the widest possible margin. Alright, so Ronnie has a pretty commanding lead in both career century breaks and career max breaks, but he's been a pro for 30 years. Maybe he's just an accumulator, is what an idiot would say. Sit back down, I'm not done. So we've got career century breaks and max breaks out of the way, but how does he do in tournaments? Really well. He does really well in tournaments. There are snooker tournaments all over the world during the season, but only 15 of those tournaments affect a player's world ranking. A win in one of these tournaments is called a ranking title, and only about 75 players in history have won one. Ronnie has won 39. 39. Of all the tournaments throughout the year, the most prestigious are the 3 that make up the Snooker Triple Crown: the World Championships, the UK Championships, and the Masters Tournament. If you win each of these tournaments at least once over the course of your career, you have what's called a Career Triple Crown, which only 11 men in history have ever done. Not only has Ronnie won all 3 of these tournaments at least once, he's combined to win them 21 times. If there's one knock on Ronnie's stellar resume, it's that he's never won all 3 Triple Crown tournaments in the same year, which Stephen Hendry, Mark Williams, and Steve David have all done. But if we're going by raw tournament success, Ronnie O'Sullivan is the winningest snooker player in history. As an aside, I read through a lot of Wikipedia articles in preparation for this video because snooker doesn't really have a comprehensive research database, and I noticed something interesting. I couldn't find a single snooker-related Wikipedia article that doesn't have Ronnie's name in it. Even the article explaining the rules mentions him at the end. He's also mentioned in the article of every single high-level snooker player on Earth, usually because they've lost to him in a major tournament. It's almost cruel. If you're an accomplished snooker player, Wikipedia just has to point out that you're less accomplished than Ronnie. He's the great equalizer. The one thing that all great snooker players have in common is they've all gotten their shit rocked by Ronnie O'Sullivan. Part 4. The most dominant athlete in the history of sports? So at this point in history, Ronnie O'Sullivan is the undisputed GOAT of snooker, but I've asserted that he's the most dominant athlete in sports history. How am I going to back that up? Long story short, I'm not. Don't get me wrong, it's really tempting to compare Ronnie O'Sullivan to someone like Tom Brady. From a distance, their careers are almost identical. They're the same age, they've won the same number of championships across the exact same amount of time, and they both look really goofy when they run.
No, 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 no.
They both look so silly. Silly boys. But Tom Brady wasn't a household name until he won 3 championships in 4 years, surrounded by one of the greatest teams ever assembled. In college, he was a middle-of-the-road quarterback who waddled into the combine looking more like a dentist than a future Hall of Famer. Ronnie was setting the world on fire when he was in high school, and he's still setting the world on fire today.
But this one is extra special. It's a maximum from Ronnie O'Sullivan.
But does that matter? Is it even relevant? See, snooker is different from most sports in that age and physique don't really affect an athlete's performance. If you're a teenager who's put in the hours necessary to be a pro, you can go pro. And if you're 50 years old and still feeling it, there's nothing stopping you. And this is what makes a career like Ronnie's so tough to evaluate. There just isn't another athlete like him. So not only do I think it's intellectually dishonest to compare Ronnie to a guy like Tom Brady, it's just dumb. I'm not making this video to compare Ronnie to every transcendent athlete who's ever lived and explain why I think he's more dominant. That would be reductive nonsense. I'm making this video because snooker is fascinating and Ronnie has one of the most interesting career arcs that I've ever seen. I'd rather just dive deeper into what I think makes him so special. Part 5, The Legend of Ronnie. Before I wrap up this video, I want to take a closer look at one of my favorite moments of Ronnie's entire career. Not only is this a dominant career highlight, but it showcases just how savage he can be. This frame is from the 2010 World Open against Mark King, and it might be one of the most disrespectful things I've ever seen. Ronnie's like 2 or 3 shots into the frame, and the table looks so nice that he straight up asks the ref if there's a bonus for getting a max break.
He's asking him what the price for the maximum break is here.
The announcers are beside themselves, the ref has no clue what's going on, and his opponent is sweating bullets. Look at his face.
Blimey, this is about to be a thrashing, isn't it?
So it turns out there isn't a special prize for getting a max break, but that's not going to stop Ronnie from going for it. I talked a lot about the max break earlier, but I want to reiterate just how much precision is involved here. Every time he pots one of the reds, the cue ball ends up exactly where he wants it for his free shot. And every shot looks totally different. Look at how differently the cue ball moves in this shot versus this shot. The 13th free shot is the highlight of the whole frame. If he wants to get the cue ball in position to pot one of those stubborn reds that are right next to each other, he has to sink the black and send the cue ball all the way around the table.
If he pulls this off and gets position, it'll bring the house down. He's got to avoid the green, the brown, and get back up behind those 2 reds.
Yeah, I think the path is between the green and brown, so he's got to really get into this and get close to that corner pocket. It's all about pace. He's got the line as he got the pace. He's got the line as he got the pace. Absolutely superb.
But one amazing shot isn't enough. Ronnie needs a max break. If successful, he'll have the most in history. But the record isn't the only thing on his mind. He's just showboated on national television. If he messes up now, he'll never hear the end of it. He needs to put his money where his mouth is.
Absolutely.
122.
And he's smiling and joking with...
Well, what can you say about this man? I mean, as we say, in the last frame, it looks as though he wasn't really bothered.
129.
Mark King has missed a red, and this has just been sensational.
But I also think there's a part of Ronnie that knows this moment is bigger than snooker.
Come on, Ronnie.
I can't make the argument that Ronnie O'Sullivan is the greatest athlete in the history of sports.
Everybody wants to know what I would do if I didn't win.
But he can.
I guess we'll never know.